Hello and welcome to Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. My name is CJ Baumgartner. As we get ready to close out the year of 2023, get ready for 2024. Hey, how you doing? Hope you had a Merry Christmas and hope you have a great New Year as we get ready for things to maybe happen in Twins territory. Not looking good so far. There have been some moves, albeit minor. Literally, as there's two minor league contract signings for the Twins and AJ Alexy and old friend Nico Goodrum. So we'll talk about that in a second. Also, Josh Staumont, like is it supposed to be French? I've heard a couple people pronounce it. So I'm very sorry, Josh, if you're listening to this podcast and I butcher it. All apologies. Anyway, so those are the Twins' three big signings, two minor league signings. One of them being a reliever, one of them being a utility guy, both a collective meh. We'll get to that in a second. And then Josh Staumont, which is in all intents and purposes a meh signing, but has some intrigue. And we'll get to that as we start off this podcast. Some other things I want to talk about in the pod today. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of what the Twins' most impactful thing this offseason could be without a free agent signing or a trade taking place. Also, kind of talking about the Tyler Mahle trade one last time, because now it's the value is done. The Twins aren't getting any more value from that as he signed somewhere else. We also are going to talk a little Christian Vazquez, Mauer Hall of Fame odds, and a couple other things as we try and navigate through this podcast here today. Why don't we start off by talking about Josh Staumont? So he signed a 1-year deal that is under $1 million, or kind of in that range. And it's according to Dan Hayes of The Athletic. I think that is a really good signing because basically, it's in some ways you can look at it as the Emilio Pagan replacement, but I don't even think it's a replacement because the Twins at least saw some valuable innings for Pagan. It might be like was the Sandy De Leon? He might have been a minor league free agent signing, but somewhere in that stratosphere. I've seen other people link it to Brock Stewart. There's been a couple other sign like the signing that there's some upside there. The reason Josh Staumont, now he pitched for the Kansas City Royals at his best in 2020 and for 2021, he was a really good setup man, late inning. He wasn't a closer, but he was a great firefighter. And literally like the guy threw flames with his fastball, and he still does. But the thing is in 2022 and 23, he was injured. And, there'll be some people listening go, oh, the Twins signed another free agent who's injured all the time. Well, I mean, yeah, but when you're signing for a bullpen arm, any bullpen arm you sign has had some injury history in their career. And if you look at somebody like Brock Stewart, who had a ton of injury history, and even with the Twins this season, he still ended up being a very impactful arm during the regular season and especially in the postseason. So that's kind of the archetype. If you look at it, a guy who has some nice raw stuff and you can turn into something. Now, if you look at Josh Staumont's raw numbers, if you look at his baseball savant page, nothing really jumps out at you. The one main thing is going to be his ERA. His ERA in 2022, 6.5. His ERA in 2023, 4.5. And also only logged 20 innings last season. In 2022, had 37 2/3 innings, but his fastball velocity is in the 80th percentile. That thing's up there. His extension is up there as well. Outside of that, he's got decent strikeout numbers. He walks a lot of guys, which again, his issue is he walks a lot, gets hurt. So he's not going to be relied on to be that setup man. That's what his ceiling is when everything is going right. And if things go right on this 1-year deal in Minnesota, if things don't go right, well, he's under $1 million. You can cut him. He can be a low leverage reliever. He can be somebody who just fills gaps. Now, after the Twins lost a couple guys from the bullpen, when you talk about Emilio Pagan, you also got to think of guys like Sandy De Leon, who Sandy Leon was the catcher. De Leon, the pitcher for the Twins last season, who had Tommy John surgery. He was going to be a really nice piece of this bullpen before he got hurt. So the Twins, again, they signed Addison Reed after the 2017 season, and a complete dud. I think he got cut in 2019, or if he even got that far. But the Twins don't spend money on relievers just because you're not going to spend a lot of money First of all, the Twins don't spend a lot of money on free agent pitching, but if you're not going to spend a lot of money on free agent starting pitching, why would you spend a lot of money on guys who are only going to throw every other day and throw an inning? And that's where you try and kind of not cheap your way through it, but it's a way of trying to kind of streamline and best distribute your assets in terms of money. Because remember, the Colorado Rockies in like 2018, they spent a ton of money on their bullpen and it led to nothing. Because then you have a bunch of bloated contracts and guys who are never going to see the value of that because they pitch 2 innings, 3 innings a week. You know what I mean? So that's why teams don't typically spend money on relievers. That's why the Twins will take a flyer on Josh Staumont. Now, remember, the top part of the bullpen, still really good. You still have Duran up there. You still have Griffin Jacks. You still have Brock Stewart. Again, injury concerns will still be there, but he's towards the top. You have some guys who can do some things in the bullpen hierarchy. So it's not like you're bringing him in and you're relying on him to be your lockdown setup guy, because you're not. You're saying if he can be, that's great. But at the very least, if we just get another body in here, kind of keep things moving, and we'll see what happens. Bullpens, and especially Twins bullpens, are kind of just a piece together by year. Like every single year, we'll try something different and kind of try and piece the bullpen together. Now, the main parts, again, are still in place when you have Duran and Jax and a couple of those other guys. But also, the Twins kind of like to build the bullpen on the fly. And even if you look at the bullpen in the early part of the 2022 season, it looks 2023, excuse me, it looks much different than it did at the end of the 2023 season. Now, again, that's because guys like Paddock came back, Maeda moved to the bullpen, Varland moved to the bullpen. And again, that similar thing could still happen even if Varland is a 5th starter. And then all of a sudden, once the playoffs come around, you kick him to the bullpen because you only need realistically 3 starters in a playoff series anyways. So there's still some things you can do. If you're the Twins, it's how can we get some bodies? You take a chance. Relievers are the one spot where I have no issue just taking flyer on guys because it's pretty easy to get rid of them, or it's theoretically easy to hide them. It's easy to hide a mop-up guy, not necessarily an innings eater, like a long reliever. Maybe that's the best way to word it. You can't really stash a long reliever, as the Twins learned a year ago, because there's never really the picture-perfect situation to use it. And when there is, it doesn't happen very often. And if it does happen a lot, then you're just not very good, or you're insanely good, in which case, well, it doesn't really matter. But anyway, Josh Staumont, his big thing, and Vikings athletic writer, Minnesota Vikings athletic writer, Alec Lewis, who used to write for The Athletic covering the Kansas City Royals, had a really great piece on Staumont after his 2020 season. And I believe it was after his 2020 season, or maybe it was after 2021, but it just talks about the story of how he came up through the ranks and what led him to be drafted. He went to Azusa Pacific, a college, which is just a little college in California, and did all of this stuff. And basically, he kind of just played baseball because he kind of found out halfway through his life he's pretty good at it, and picked it up late and became really good, and just kind of is a natural born thrower. He's not somebody who really has had a ton of tinkering, and especially being in the Kansas City Royals organization. I know that they typically have pretty good bullpens, and their back end of their bullpens have typically been good. The problem is their starting pitching has just been atrocious, but also get him in the Fall V pitching lab, see what he can do. What do the Twins have in mind for Staumont? Now, obviously, there's nothing that they could really do to prevent injuries, but is there a way that they can take Staumont's game to a different level? Is it, reworking a pitch? Is it whatever? I mean, there's a couple things, I don't want to assume everything, they'll have him throw more sliders because the Twins like having players throw sliders, which I think they do if looking at the numbers, but I don't, have any concrete evidence to prove that, especially since they added the sweeper. Now it's the new wrinkle. But the thing is with Staumont, it's a signing, and I'm talking about this way more than I really need to, because he's just right now he's a mid to low tier reliever in terms of importance that could be a high tier. And all he really has to do is stay healthy and avoid walks. And I think that's the thing that, I want to say you can coach somebody to not walk people, but Giovanni Moran had the same issue with the Twins, and you can see it frustrated them because they're like, Rocco's like, hey man, throw strikes. And he just could never, like, he always wanted to nibble. And part of it's confidence, being confident in your stuff. And maybe things change in that aspect. But overall, Staumont is a fine signing. He's a flamethrower. And the whole point of that athletic piece is that he doesn't really know quite yet what he's doing. And maybe that's an overstatement. But the point is that he's still learning a lot about the game of baseball. I mean, he was drafted by the Royals in 2015 as a second-round pick. He's 30 years old. So, I mean, he does have some stuff going on. But also, there's the sense of like he's spent his entire career in the Kansas City Royals organization, which has not been touted as pitching developers. Maybe there's something there that Falvey can look on. Maybe the Twins have shown that they can find something in guys. Maybe there's something there. So it's a little intriguing in the sense of if that works out, you essentially have another Brock Stewart, except a Brock Stewart who can throw heat. If you look at Staumont's average fastball, his average fastball velocity, trying to find it on his Savant page here. But if you look at his average fastball velocity, I mean, it's in the 80th percentile as we found it at the top portion of the page. Man, I cannot find it. Okay. All right. Well, that's embarrassing. So looking through some of his stats here, just with his pitches and with his movements and everything. Again, like in terms of run values, his four-seamer isn't exactly firing on all cylinders. In fact, it had a -2 run value in 2023, but in 2022, it had a run value of 5. 2021 had a run value of 6. 2020 had a run value of 5. So I think the fastball still has some life on it. I think injuries obviously play a big concern into it. He does like to use the slider. He's got a 40% strikeout rate when he uses that pitch. So I think that there's, again, some things that you can use here. His fastball average velocity is 95.6 miles an hour on average. So again, this is a guy that can throw some heat. This is a guy that can do some things, but he walks a lot of guys and is injured. And that's what's preventing him from being what he was in Kansas City at his peak in 2020 and 2021, which was a highly effective setup man. He still has that in him. Again, injuries and walks. And do injuries lead into walks? If you're not quite confident in your stuff because you're injured, are you going to be more likely to nibble? Are you going to be less likely to go after guys? Who's to say? I don't know. And do you pitch differently if you're on a different team, different ballparks, different whatever? They primarily are going to play the same opponents because it's in the same division, but you get my gist. And Staumont's a fine signing. It's not exactly the thing that everybody needs to get excited over, but it is something. And the Twins at least have a signing. I know that there's people who look at some of the things the Twins do, like they haven't signed anybody yet, but guys, like, why are we surprised? Derek Falvey does not sign people early. I mean, I know that there was the Vazquez signing last year, but that's only out of pure necessity. That was because they needed to get a free agent catcher. And there are some kind of off the top needs, but there's no like glaring, like this is a gigantic need to fill hole. Any perceived holes the Twins have on their roster, they can at least have an ingrown in-house solution to kind of say, well, this guy can step up. And it might not be the best. I'm not saying that, but it's not like a glaring, like the Twins thought after 2022 was, can Jeffers do it? We don't know if he can take on the workload of being the guy. We need to get a catcher. So we're going to go get Christian Vazquez. Like that's something that happened. And even with the Twins in 2017, they went out and they got Jason Castro because Kurt Suzuki wasn't coming back and they had a glaring hole at catcher. So I don't know why catcher was the theme here, but when there's a glaring hole at a position, the Twins will sign a guy to go fill it. They signed Nelson Cruz around this time before the 2019 season. And I know that the Twins try not to do the 2018 sign everybody on the second week of spring training thing. So obviously we're going to have some signings before spring really gets going, or at least the bulk of signings will be done by spring training. Maybe like a Donovan Solano type signing happens. But, the biggest things with the Twins is that things usually happen in January with Minnesota. I think that's going to be what happens. I think January is the month where the Twins pull off a trade. I think that's the month only because spring training starts midway through February. The Twins, I know 2022 was different because of the lockout, they're going to try and sign their guys before spring training really gets going, because you want to be able to have your coaches work with guys. And when you have somebody come in halfway through spring training, they're behind the 8 ball in terms of getting caught up and facing live pitching and doing all this. They're also behind the 8 ball in terms of working with coaches and getting kind of a game plan. Like, remember with Pablo Lopez, the Twins traded for him and immediately they like pulled him into a room and were like, hey, here's what we want you to do. Here's the plan. Here are our expectations. Here's what we think you can do. What do you think? Like, you can sit down and talk with coaches. You can have contact with a pitching coach. You can have contact with some assistant coaches. You can use the facilities in Fort Myers and Target Field. Like, there's a couple different areas and things that you can just do. You know what I mean? When you sign early. And the Twins, obviously, it doesn't matter signing guys in November or December. But I think January is obviously where you saw the Correa thing transpire, but also it's where you saw the Luis Arraez trade for Pablo Lopez last year. I think that could be the time when the Twins really make some moves. I believe the Michael A. Taylor trade happened around this time, and now I'm kind of uncertain of it. So I'm going to look up Michael A. Taylor trade and see what we get, because I think that trade happened at the end of January, although it could have happened around, it happened January 23rd. So see, exactly, this is my point. Pablo Lopez, Michael A. Taylor, some of those trades happened in January. I think January, if we're basing it off last year, and I think that it probably stands to reason that sometime in the next 31 days, we see a Twins transaction, and maybe it's something minor, but I could definitely see if they are going to trade Polanco or Kepler, that's probably the time to do it. Now, also at the end of the day, maybe there's like a Taylor Rogers trade cooking somewhere where it happens like the day before opening day. But again, that also happened in a lockout shortened off season. So I know the Twins are late in making moves, but they're not going to like be the kid that turns this assignment in on online at like 12:58 p.m. when it's due at 12:59. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to put it that close to under the wire, but they are going to turn it in at like 10:30. You know what I mean? Enough time to where you can at least feel comfortable that things are done, but also not, you know? Anyway, so that's the Staumont signing. And that also explains, again, like the Royals signed a bunch of guys. They're not, guys, I don't mean to burst your bubble here, but the amount of free agent signings doesn't mean you're going to do well. Teams that quote unquote win the offseason rarely ever win in the regular season. Now we'll see with the Dodgers signing Yamamoto and Ohtani. Maybe that's, and honestly, that's an outlier. That's not the average. But teams like, you know, who won the offseason last year? The San Diego Padres won the offseason last year. They didn't even make the playoffs. And there are a couple other teams had some big moves and they didn't win the offseason. You look at who the Mets last year, they won the offseason. You look at you know, the Phillies, did they win the offseason? Now the Phillies had a good season, but you know, my point is like, just because you get this kind of off-season champion crown doesn't necessarily mean anything. And by the way, the Royals are signing a bunch of mid-free agents. The Twins don't need to sign mid-free agents. The Royals need to sign a bunch of mid-free agents because their roster stinks. The Twins roster is in a much better spot. So all this workup over guys, over like, I can't even think of some names, but guys being worked up over minor free agents going to Kansas City, but at least the Royals are trying. It's my worst kind of, people like, just do something. It's my, with anything in life, like doing something just to do something is the absolute worst thing you could do. Case in point, like Terry Ryan signing, just sign a big pitcher, Terry Ryan, and he'd sign Ricky Nolasco and Irvin Santana. And you're like, well, technically, I guess that's what people were asking for. Anyway, so that's kind of how things shake out there. There's a couple minor league free agent signings in AJ Alexy and Nico Goodrum. AJ Alexy, if you remember, the Twins kind of like had him for a second. They like traded for him for like cash. And then I think they cleared him to make room for Carlos Correa. I think that, or Pablo Lopez. It was one of those two guys, or I think it was Correa, because I think that's how they made room on the 40-man. But don't quote me on that. It was some kind of weird move where it was just like, oh, hey, AJ Alexy's here. No, he's not. And that's kind of how that transpired. I mean, collective, I mean, he's again, a minor league free agent. You sign him to a deal. He's got a decent amount of fastball velo, but nothing like special. Nothing special, really. But again, he's a guy. He's a guy you throw in there, and maybe he's your Jarrell Cotton, or he's your whatever guy you can just call up and send up and down when you need him. AJ Alexi didn't pitch at all in 2023 on a major league team, so it's a flyer. Don't waste your time on it. Nico Goodrum, I know he was in the Twins organization, a second round pick by the team in 2010, kind of washed out. He was with the Tigers, then he was with the Astros in 2022. Again, did not play in 2023. So these are kind of flyers. I know people are going to look at the success of Willie Castro and maybe say, like, could we get something out of this? And there's that possibility. But the thing that made Willie Castro so intriguing to keep on the roster was the fact is that he could play the infield and out. He could play all three outfield positions. He could play shortstop. He could play third base and second base. The thing with Nico Goodrum is he theoretically has played the corner outfield spots and infield spots in his career. And with Detroit in 2018, he played the corners. He played every infield position. But again, he's not like a great fielder at many other spots. He's a decent, I think infield probably is a spot like shortstop based on his run value on defense. But also, like, in 2022, he only played first and second base, and that wasn't very often. And also, he's getting up there a little bit. He was born he was drafted in 2010. He's his age 31 season. The speed is still in the top half, like it's still in the 53rd percentile, but also again, like, you're not really getting a base stealer like you did in Willie Castro. You're not really getting the flexible multi-fielder, unless maybe the Twins are kind of grooming him for that role. Because like Willie Castro, Goodrum is a switch hitter. Like, that's on the high end, it's a Willie Castro. On the low end, it's just a guy who sits in AAA all year. And oh gosh, an infielder's on the IL. We just need somebody to just be on the roster for a week. And you call up Nico Goodrum and you play him maybe in one game, and then you send him back down to St. Paul. But again, those are the moves. I wouldn't really waste your time on much of those. Don't worry about them. But they're signings, they're additions, they're off-season news, which we have to talk about here on the Bombs Away podcast. By the way, give us a follow, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating. We always love to see that. Also have live streams on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So there you go. You got some working on an Instagram, potentially seeing what we can do with that. But how many people listen to podcasts on Instagram? That's kind of that's my one thing, but maybe there's something there. Anyway, appreciate the follows, appreciate the stuff. We still got more of a podcast to go here. I want to talk a little bit about where things sit with their offseason, because again, the Twins haven't made a ton of signings, and that part of goes with the free agency. It goes with the Twins not spending a lot of money because the Bally TV deal. But here's the thing, and this is, some people are going to roll their eyes at this, and I don't blame you. A healthy and productive Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton are probably more impactful than any free agent the Twins could bring in. I know. I'm giving you a second to roll your eyes here, but hear me out. And again, I'm putting my fan cap, I'm putting on my glass. I'm grabbing my glass that's half full here to do this analysis. But here's my justification. Now, the one thing is people are going, well, Correa sucked for 2 years in a row in the regular season and got progressively worse last year, except in the postseason. We'll get to that in a second. And Byron Buxton has just been unhealthy and hasn't played a game in center field since 2022. Even then, he was splitting time between center field and DH. So I get it. And with Buxton, there's always going to be believe it when I see it, which I think is probably the right approach. But I get it. I get that there's not really reason to be optimistic when we talk about Buxton and his health, just because we've gotten burned so many times. Even when he flashes all MLB potential, it's not even his fault. He just gets injuries, just kind of get in the way. But I think with Buxton and Correa, when those two are at their peaks, and if we can even get one of them having a season at their peak, it's more impactful than any free agent you could bring in. I mean, look at Carlos Correa. He was basically a league average player if you look at his F-WAR in 2023, if you look at his Fangraphs page, as I'm pulling up here, he statistically had the worst season of his career. It was bad. But again, the plantar fasciitis, he had another rough start. He ended up finishing with a wins above replacement factor, somewhere sitting around 1.1 in 2023. Again, a career low. But if you look at the Steamer projection, it has him with a WAR of 3.5, which again isn't like world-beating good, but is also just a step up from where he sat in his career. And again, an extra 2 wins means a lot for this team, because the Twins were an 89 win team a year ago. A couple extra gets you up into 91. And effectively, the Twins got it from the September Correa. And we talked about that. Like, he gets better as the season goes along. Typically, once, like, he's had 2 really good Septembers. He had a really, really good October. Again, with Carlos Correa, he's impactful, and he's still, you've at least seen you have a little bit of that left in the tank. And the encouraging part is it happened as the season got later. And again, maybe I'm wish casting, maybe I'm kind of trying to happy talk my way through this thing. But if you look at the value you get from Carlos Correa, even if the Twins sign like a high-end free agent like a Cody Bellinger, and I really wanted the Twins to sign Bellinger last year over Gallo, would have worked out pretty well. But do I think Cody Bellinger can repeat his success? Based off the underlying numbers, I would be very hesitant to give him the $300 million deal he's seeking. Now if the Twins want to give like a Carlos Correa type contract to Bellinger of like, here's a 3-year deal with opt-outs kind of a deal. But even then, I don't think the Twins are going to do that, because they don't have the cap space for it. Even on a 1-year deal, I don't think they could justify it. But even if you look at a Cody Bellinger giving the production he gave, a normal and healthy Correa and Buxton give you that production in the aggregate. You know what I mean? Like, you have guys on the roster who are talented enough to be these changing players. So, and the free agent class that we talked about isn't necessarily great for starting pitching. So this offseason probably isn't the worst for the Twins not to spend. Now, that being said, where it's going to hurt the Twins is where they can't retain Michael A. Taylor or a Donovan Solano or a Kyle Farmer. That's where it's going to hurt them, is in the depth. But in terms of the high-end free agency talent, Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton, just even returning to a shred of the top-end talent that they've shown, would be huge. I mean, you look at Byron Buxton and some of the things he's done. If you look at the period in 2017 when he was trying to figure some things out, he was one of the best hitters in baseball. I have his slash line pulled up here. I'm trying to find it. Buxton was a borderline MVP candidate in 2021 and 2022 before getting hurt. He had a slash line of 215, 295, 550, which again, the 295 on base is low. I get it. But the slugging percentage of 550 combined with 23 home runs in just 67 games, that's a weighted runs created plus of 138. Hip injuries held him on 2022 last year, obviously, with the knee thing, again, things haven't gone well for Buxton. And even then, we've seen him be the player in spurts that we know he can be. And my thing is that even if you get them semi at that level, I'm not saying a full healthy season of Byron Buxton. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you can just get Buxton to go on like a 2021 run. I mean, Buxton in 2022 the Twins jumped out to a great start in 2022, thanks in part and large part to Byron Buxton being one of the best players in baseball in the first 2 months of the 2022 season. Really in that first half, I mean, he was an all-star, but the injury part slowed him down in the second half when they really needed him. So again, it's a little glass half full perspective, but a healthy Buxton and Correa really do change the outlook for this team, because there's your superstar power there's the things that can kind of get you through. It doesn't matter if Kevin Kiermaier went to the Blue Jays, and look, Kevin Kiermaier would have been great as a Twin. I'm sure Rocco Baldelli would have loved to have him. I'm sure the Twins brass would have loved to have him. But if you have Bucks, and I get that that's wish casting. I get that it's probably unrealistic, but it makes up for it if you can get it out of at least one of them. You know what I mean? I'm not saying you have to have career years for Buxton and Correa. I'm not even saying you have to have a career year for one of them, but can one of them just get back to their career average level production? And the Twins are in a much better spot in 2024. Some other things to talk about. Speaking of the hitters, Christian Vazquez, again, as we talk about players that might be casualties of the Twins cutting payroll, Christian Vazquez is a trade candidate because he's making $10 million. He's going to be not the backup catcher, because as we talked about before on the podcast, the Twins necessarily don't see catchers as a 1-2. They see him as a 1A, 1B. The catching split isn't necessarily Joe Mauer plays every day and Mike Redmond plays on the Sunday games. You know what I mean? Like, it's a guy plays 2 games, other guy plays 1, and it splits off like a 70-30 or even like a 65-35, even a 60-40 kind of split. And it allows you to ride the hot hand. The Twins rode with Vazquez early last season. Jeffers in the second half started to get hot. Twins ended up having Jeffers as the primary catcher, which is not starting catcher, because both of them are capable of starting, but primary catcher. And the Twins rode with Jeffers the entire postseason, in fact, but it's a little bit different considering that you get a little bit more rest in postseason games. Also, the games matter like way more than the regular season. So, you know, in the regular season, you give the guy a day off because it's grind. In the postseason, it's not a grind. You're sprinting now. But either way, Vazquez had a not good year. He's on the hook for $10 million a year for the next 2 years. And, you know, the Twins could theoretically get out of that contract. And so there's a lot of people, because Christian Vazquez didn't have a good year and because he's owed a lot of money, it makes sense that the Twins would trade him to get out from underneath that contract. And I get it. And I'm not pounding the table saying the Twins need to keep Christian Vazquez. They'll be dumb if they trade him. Like Falvey will be, what's he cooking? You know, like whatever. No, I mean, I don't care if they trade Vazquez, but I think that there's a strong case to be made for keeping Christian Vazquez. One, you know, maybe he rebounds from a down year before. Now, the case could be made he's 32 plus years old as a catcher, only getting older. Is, you know, catchers already don't hit great. Is Vazquez going to keep getting worse as a hitter? And his defense will slightly get worse as well. And the big thing about Vazquez is he's a very, very good defensive catcher. So if that starts to wane and his hitting gets worse, like it's almost unplayable, and you're on the hook with him for a full another season. But what I would say is there is a chance you could see a bounce back. But also, what value are the Twins really going to get? Are the Twins going to be able to get out from underneath all of that contract? The Twins are on the hook for $20 million for the next 2 seasons. Are they really going to get a team that's so desperate for catching that they're going to take that entire contract on? Now, as we learned with the Josh Donaldson contract, there is always a team somewhere who's willing to just take on a whole contract. Thanks, Brian Cashman. But also with a catcher who hasn't been an MVP before, like Josh Donaldson was, you know, teams probably are going to be hesitant. And if the Twins, let's say the Twins do get rid of him and get out from underneath most of the contract, but the Twins maybe have to pay the $10 million remaining of the $20 million for a team in a cap crunch, self-imposed, for a team in a self-imposed salary crunch. Why would you want to waste $10 million of a guy who is not going to give you value actively? Like, you're going to pay him to play against you at a time when you're trying to save as much money as possible. At the very least, he could provide you value by playing for your baseball team and being a catcher. Now, I know that there's Jahmyr Camargo in AAA, and maybe he could be something. And yeah, he had a nice year at AAA. I don't know how confident I'd be, though, to just roll out the red carpet for him to be the backup catcher. You know, and again, maybe Jahmyr Camargo comes up at some point during the season and he rakes, and boom, we got catcher number 2. We pair with Jeffers. The Twins have 2 very cheap team-controlled players for the next 4 years. That's also a possibility. But again, if that fails, then the Twins don't have a backup catcher, and then you're kind of forced to rely more on Jeffers. And again, I think the Twins have generally, when you look at Garver, when you look at Jeffers, have had pretty good hitting catchers because they give them rest, because they give them a break. They don't necessarily ride their catchers. And maybe that's a trend throughout all of baseball that I'm just missing out on. But I kind of believe that's why the Twins catchers are pretty good hitters, is because they value them resting their legs a little bit. It's again why Joe Mauer was so awesome as a catcher, because he played every single day and was such a good hitter. But you're not really going to get much value getting rid of Vazquez. And yeah, you could say, well, if they get rid of $10 million, well, then theoretically they could sign a $10 million free agent. And you're right, but also it's $10 million over the next couple of years. And also, again, are you, the free agent you sign for $5 million or $10 million, are they going to bring you in the same value or more as Christian Vazquez? Because they have to bring in more value. And are they going to do that? It's running the calculations. Yeah, on paper, getting rid of Vazquez and getting rid of some salary, that sounds good. But then, okay, but you're not going to get rid of his entire salary, likely. And what are you going to do with the salary that you have? Because it's only going to be part of it. And now you're paying a guy to play against you. I don't know. It's not because I think Christian Vazquez is an all-around great catcher and he's going to have a bounce back year and the Twins are going to feel foolish if they trade him. It's more of like it probably is a better value play to keep Christian Vazquez than it is to get rid of him, even though getting rid of him could theoretically clear up some money. The Twins are already pressed up against the money limit. And unless the Twins plan on getting rid of Polanco and Kepler and Farmer and Vazquez, well, yeah, that opens up some salary, but also what is that salary going to be used for? Most of the free agents that are worth signing are done, unless you are planning on signing a Bellinger or something like that. Maybe the money is, maybe you do clear up Polanco and Vazquez and Kepler and Farmer, and you get rid of all four of those guys and you bring in a Cody Bellinger on like a Carlos Correa type contract. Again, it just feels like you're not shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, but it just feels like you're moving furniture around the room and saying that you redecorated. You know what I mean? Like you're not quite getting as much value, I think, as you think you are. Now, Christian Vazquez probably will produce the same amount that he did a year ago. And as a backup catcher, that's fine. As a backup catcher, you're paying $10 million, or maybe a secondary catcher, I should say, that you're paying $10 million. Yeah, I get why that doesn't look good, but does it look better to get rid of him for, does it look good to pay money to get rid of him? And, again, Jahmyr Camargo might be a good secondary catcher. And then you can get rid of Vazquez. I think it's a lot easier than to justify, because you say, well, we have Jahmyr Camargo. He can take that spot. And again, maybe then at the trade deadline, you can kind of dump Vazquez somewhere. Maybe that's the play. Maybe at the end of next offseason, you can reevaluate the Vazquez thing, because it'd be much easier to move on from Vazquez on a 1-year expiring contract than it is on a 2-year contract, which he currently has right now. I just think that there's some value there, because again, the Twins catchers stayed pretty healthy. Jeffers and Vazquez stayed pretty healthy in 2023. That's probably not going to happen. And it's not to say that Jeffers is injury prone or anything, but Jeffers missed half of the 2022 season. He, like Vazquez has had injuries in his career. They're both not going to stay healthy. So when one of them inevitably gets hurt for a month, Jahmyr Camargo gets his audition. That's not going to block playing time, I don't think, for Jahmyr Camargo that much. But it's not like Camargo is necessarily this hotshot prospect either. He's a guy who's developed nicely and could be a nice major league player. I think he will be a nice major league player, but it's not like a Royce Lewis where it's like we're blocking a guy, or even a Matt Wallner situation. And it's not like you're blocking Matt Wallner with a Joey Gallo. Maybe I'm being too pro Vazquez here, but I just don't think that there's a ton of value necessarily in getting rid of Vazquez. I don't think that the value of getting rid of Vazquez far and away highly outweighs getting rid of him. You know what I mean? Like, or I think keeping him. I think that getting rid of Vazquez doesn't necessarily, it makes sense on paper when you don't really think about it. But I think when you kind of take it to that second and third level, I'm not necessarily like, once he gets traded, I'm going to be like, boom, off season fixed. Like you're still going to have to figure some things out. Because again, if the Twins only have Camargo and Jeffers, and one of them gets hurt, well, who's your backup catcher? I mean, you can always find emergency third catchers anywhere. It's just more of like, it's going to be a vast step down, even from Vazquez. And Vazquez is still a good defensive catcher. He's still a good game manager. Like, he's a 2-time World Series champion. Like, there's some things to like about having Vazquez in your clubhouse and on your team and doing some things. I'm not necessarily in a rush to get rid of Vazquez. If the Twins do it, that's fine. I'm not going to like be upset or anything, but I don't necessarily see the point in trading him to get rid of him just because you sign him to a bad contract and he had a bad year in his first year under the 3-year contract. Meh. Anyway, the Tyler Mahle trade is in the books. Tyler Mahle signed a contract with the Texas Rangers, kind of a 2-year deal because he's recovering from Tommy John. He'll come back probably midway through next season. And basically it kind of closes the book on the worst trade, I would say, of the Falvey era. There's some other ones that are not good. Sam Dyson wasn't good because they traded him for nothing, got no value in 2019 when that was probably their best shot outside of this year under the Falvey era to make a run. And that was kind of their marquee trade. And he literally got injured and then was found out to be a terrible person. So like that maybe was bad, but he's also a reliever. So like there's a little bit of stock in terms of value of a reliever compared to a starting pitcher, especially in terms of what the Twins had to give up to get a starting pitcher who had another full year of team control. There's the Lamont Wade for Sean Anderson. That one's not really good with the Giants. Twins, 2 of the Twins' top 3 worst trades have come with the Giants. There's a sneaky, by the way, the Ryan Pressly trade in 2018, where the Twins, I think, got Jorge Alcala in the deal. But again, Ryan Pressly has just been set literally from the moment he stepped into Minute Maid Park in 2018. Ryan Pressly has been one of the best relievers in baseball. And he was like a B reliever. He was a good reliever that the Astros turned great. And that's one if you're the Twins where you're like, okay, that one got away. Like that's one. So there are some L's. Now that's not to say Falvey sucks at trading. I mean, you look at some other trades like getting rid of Donaldson. You look at trading for Pablo Lopez. There's some good trades in there. Trading for Sergio Romo. There's some good finds in there. I'm not trying to say Falvey stinks at trading, but the 2022 trade deadline was definitely one to forget. And the Tyler Mahle trade is kind of the cherry on top of that one. With Tyler Mahle, you gave up Spencer Steer, you gave up Steven Hajar, you gave up Christian Encarnacion Strand. Steven Hajar got traded to the Guardians, so he's now in Cleveland's organization. But Encarnacion Strand and Steer aren't like franchise cornerstones, but they are building blocks for their franchise. They're not like building the franchise around Steer and Strand. They're building it around Hunter Green and De La Cruz and a couple of those guys. But also like they're nice pieces. Like the Twins are building their franchise around Royce Lewis and, you know, Walker Jenkins and Brooks Lee and a couple of and Carlos Correa. You know, Max Kepler is like maybe not Max Kepler anymore, but like, Matt Wallner is a building block. He's not a cornerstone. You know what I mean? Royce Lewis is where you put the cornerstone for the foundation, and then you slap a few Matt Wallner bricks along the side in between your Brooks Lee cornerstone, or in between your Walker Jenkins or your Carlos Correa, your Byron Buxton. You get my point. I'm not a contractor or an architect. Can you tell? Anyway, so with Mahle, that trade was a bust, obviously, and almost from the moment it happened because of the fact that Steer and Strand made their big league debuts in 2022, and Mahle got hurt with a shoulder injury that the Twins didn't know about. At least that specific one, the shoulder soreness. And it just felt like that trade kind of things soured pretty quickly. And then Mahle got Tommy John, who, by the way, Mahle had a nice 2023. It wasn't great. It wasn't like awe-inspiring, but for a number 4 starter, he had an ERA that was in a pretty good spot. I believe it was in the mid 3s. So like pretty respectable for a starter at the bottom of your rotation. He was going to have a nice season, I think, in 2023, and then he got the Tommy John surgery. I was a guy who thought the Tyler Mahle trade was good at the time. I wrote about it for Zone Coverage. I talked about how Mahle can be good for the Twins, and it didn't happen. I was wrong. You know, now my hedge is that I was only wrong because he got hurt, but that plays into it. It's one of the worst trades of the Falvey era. You can make a case, and I would probably say it's the worst. Now, the Ryan Pressly trade is probably 1A, 1B, but Tyler Mahle more because the Twins traded a starter at a time when they were trying to win versus in 2018 when they were selling off, when whatever. Anyway, look, it's a steep price to pay when you got Mahle, but that's kind of the price of doing business. And my main thing is the Mahle trade sucked. It failed, but the Twins should definitely do it again, given the opportunity, because we're looking at the outcome, not the process. And sometimes in these trades, you have to look at the process going in. The process going in was the Twins needed frontline starting pitching. He was going to pitch for them in a stretch run in 2022 and pitch all of 2023. Well, yeah, that's worth a couple mid to high level prospects. They're not superstar level prospects, but they're decent prospects on your list. That's not worth nothing. And it's not like Spencer Steer and Encarnacion Strand. Where would they be playing exactly? Corner outfields, you have Max Kepler there. I don't think the Twins are really going to trade Max Kepler. You have Matt Wallner on the other corner outfield. Nobody's really going to play center. None of those guys are really going to play center in terms of Strand or Steer. And for Steer as an infielder, where's he going? Royce Lewis has third. Polanco right now is second. And if Polanco doesn't have second, Ed Julian has second. And if Ed Julian doesn't have second, Brooks Lee has second. And like first base, you have Kirilloff. Julian can slide over to first base. I mean, you have options. Like the Twins have a ton of prospects. Now, again, you could say they should have used those bullets on a much better target. Fair. But to pretend like every time Strand or Steer does something, I see a bunch of Twins fans on Twitter go, well, we didn't need him. Come on, this trade stunk. The trade did stink. The Twins definitely could have traded those guys for a different player. But also, like, there's a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. I think that doesn't need to happen with the thing the Twins gave up. Sometimes you lose a trade. It happens. But also, the Twins process was good. The Twins needed a starting pitcher. He fit the bill. He would have been a good starting pitcher. Tyler Mahle would have been a very, very nice piece. And by the way, there's a case to be made. He starts the Twins' third playoff game. You know, Joe Ryan didn't necessarily have a great season. Ober was kind of up and down. Once the Twins ran past Gray and Lopez, you could have made the case Mahle could have been a guy you could have put on the mound. There's a case to be made, at least. I'm not saying he would have been, but he definitely pitched fine. He had a 3.616 ERA in 5 starts before Tommy John surgery, and that included a start where he got shelled before the Tommy John. So, like, he's had some good starts in there, didn't Mahle? And I thought the Twins could have definitely had a good year out of him. And I just don't necessarily think that there was maybe there wasn't probably a yearning for a reunion between Mahle and the Twins, which is fine. Twins just kind of collectively, Twins kind of collectively took the L on the trade and moved on. But my whole point in this is some people are going to look at this and go, the Twins should never, ever do something like that again because of how it turned out. Well, yeah, obviously, if you're judging it based on results, but the process is fine. If the Twins are in a similar situation come this year's trade deadline where they need another starting pitcher, which, by the way, every team in a stretch run could use another starting pitcher. Even the Twins last year, with as good of a starting pitching as they had, they could have used another starting pitcher because you look at the end when Ober was kind of going through some stuff and Ryan wasn't healthy yet, and you were throwing out Dallas Keuchel in the year of our Lord 2023. That was the thing that was happening. So, like, every team can use another starting pitcher all the time. That's trading for a starting pitcher for a stretch run and giving up the prospects they did wasn't bad. Trading for a pitcher like Mahle isn't even that bad. It's just the outcome didn't work. And that's going to happen with trades. And you can say, well, Mahle had the injury history, so obviously the Twins shouldn't have did that. But here's the thing. Every pitcher has injury history, even if they've never really had it in their career before. I mean, you look at another trade that was made. Now, Luis Castillo was traded to the Mariners. He pitched great. Remember Frankie Montas? He was traded to the Yankees. And everybody, I mean, I think the monkey memes are making their return with the "Where Frankie" on social media. But the A's traded Frankie Montas to the Yankees in 2022. Montas was the best pitcher at the trade deadline. Castillo and Montas were kind of 1A, 1B. Montas had a career 3.9 ERA with the A's and a 3.18 ERA up until the trade deadline in 2022. Montas stunk in New York. He got hurt in 2023. He didn't really pitch well in 2022. And it just kind of goes to show you he had a 6.15 ERA in 8 starts after the Yankees traded for him. No matter how good or healthy a pitcher has been, there's always the possibility of them getting hurt because they're a pitcher. And it's the same thing in the Twins signing Josh Staumont. Yeah, I mean, he could get hurt. And you could say, Twins, they signed a broken product and they got broken. Shocker. But it's a pitcher. They're going to get hurt. I mean, you look at Chris Paddock. He's had 2 Tommy Johns in his career. That's just kind of going to happen. It's part of the territory of signing a pitcher in today's baseball. There's not a Nolan Ryan just sitting around that's got a rubber arm. You don't find those kind of guys anymore. But anyway, there's really no way to justify the Mahle trade in hindsight. It was a horrible deal in on-field value. It could have been Falvey's worst, but competitive teams need to be able to gamble on some of these trades. Sometimes they get hurt. Sometimes you get a Justin Verlander in 2017, or you get a Luis Castillo in 2022. It's part of the nature of doing it. And the same people that are ripping on the Twins for making that trade are the same people that are ripping on the Twins right now for not making any moves. So I don't know what you want. If you just want every move to be a big time acquisition that always works out, I mean, I'm sorry, even that doesn't work for the Yankees. So it's not going to happen for the Twins. Anyway, let's wrap things up talking about Joe Mauer, because last night I was prepping to do this podcast before a couple things got in the way. But here's the thing. Joe Mauer is still sitting above the threshold. Currently, he's above 80% right now, around that 81, 82% votes for the Hall of Fame. There's about 20%, 22% of votes that have been in. So the voting is still going to take place over the next couple months. People are slowly turning in their ballots. And again, we're looking off all of the ballots that wish to be shared publicly. Whether the person wants to put their name on them or not, they're being shared. Now, there's some who remain like anonymous, and we just don't know about. Once the anonymous, at least I believe that's how that works, although I could be wrong. Here's the thing. Mauer, I feel like all the people who are not going to vote for Mauer are probably going to wait, or at least a majority of them are going to be kind of towards the end, and they're kind of going to try and slip under the radar as anonymous votes or votes that were not made public. But Joe Mauer is on a really good pace, and I think it goes to show how how we really did not value Mauer in his prime, and how we definitely didn't value Mauer when the team stunk around him. Like, everybody is getting mad at Joe Mauer for having a big contract on a team that stunk. My brother in Christ, the Twins could have signed any free agents. Their franchise wasn't good in the 2010s. It was not good. The period of 2011 to 2016 was rough. And the Twins even if you took out Mauer's contract completely and gave the Twins free reign to sign free agents, it'd be like the Kansas City Royals signing a bunch of mid free agents to make up for the fact that your development and drafting stunk. Like, that's the thing with the Twins organization. It was not in a good spot. The Twins roster was rotten. They needed to go through a deep rebuild. And Joe Mauer wasn't going to fix that. He wasn't going to, by sheer force of will. I mean, Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani are 2 of the best baseball players of all time. Like, Ohtani, Trout, 1-2. And even they couldn't lift a pathetic Angels organization to the playoffs. What makes you think Joe Mauer would have been able to? And by the way, what makes you think if Joe Mauer made $1 million that year, that the Twins are all of a sudden going to sign a super team around him? You weren't going to fix a flawed and broken roster. Anyway, and some of these arguments, by the way, I made myself. This isn't to say like all of you people are so stupid. I, 10 years ago, definitely wasn't doing this. Now, I'm going to hedge and say that I was 15 years old. But at the same time, I still made those arguments and I believed them. And then I realized the older I got that I was a dummy dumb and I didn't know what I was talking about. Because Joe Mauer is one of the greatest Minnesota Twins of all time. He's one of the best hitting catchers of all time. Injuries cut his career short. If the concussions never happened with Mauer and the bilateral leg weakness, and the concussion never happened with Morneau, things look different. Things look very, very different. If, the Twins roster looks a lot better if Justin Morneau's on it. You know what I mean? The Twins, Justin Morneau wins the MVP in 2010. I can't scream enough. Justin Morneau would have won the MVP in 2010 if he didn't take a knee to the forehead sliding into second base. Thanks, Toronto. I hate your darn dirty organization, you darn dirty Canadians. Anyway, this goes on to say Joe Mauer there's a good case Joe Mauer is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and ask Twins fans about that 10 years ago, or even when he retired. Now, I didn't think Joe Mauer was going to be a first ballot because I thought baseball would be a little persnickety about that, and they still might be, but Joe Mauer might be a second ballot Hall of Famer. I think if he doesn't get in this year, I really think he's going to get in next year. Now, Adrian Beltre, I think, has taken up a lot of the first ballot steam, but which maybe kind of helps Mauer, because Mauer was the only free agent to be inductee candidate to be considered as a first ballot. I feel like people hold off, but since Adrian Beltre is getting a lot of those votes, I think they're like, yeah, and we'll throw in Joe Mauer too. But Joe Mauer is over 2,100 hits. He's got an MVP, 3 batting titles, all of which as a catcher. He's got some Gold Gloves, Silver Sluggers. He has the hardware. It's the second half of his career that is always the bugaboo because he played first base. I get it. But at the end of the day, Joe Mauer is a Hall of Famer, and who cares if it's first ballot? Baseball voters have been really, really bad. A good chunk of them, I'm not going to say a majority, a good chunk of baseball voters have stunk at voting. I mean, look at some of those. There's a guy who didn't vote for Gary Sheffield and said, well, I'll just vote for Gary Sheffield next year. Gary Sheffield, this is his last year on the ballot, my guy. And there's people who go, well, yeah, like he'll be on the ballot next year, so I'll vote for him. But if everybody held that belief, they wouldn't have the threshold to keep being on the ballot. This is the thing. I think I'm very loose on who should be a Hall of Famer. And maybe that's bad. Maybe I'm in the wrong on that one. But I don't know why baseball has to be so persnickety about the Hall of Fame. The NFL puts in like 8 candidates a year. It's fine. We don't need to have Hall of Fame ceremonies where one guy gets in. That's boring. It's not good for the game. Anyway, that's where I'm going to end. Joe Mauer is sitting in a really good spot to make the Hall of Fame. I and a lot of other Twins fans underappreciate him. And I think it's a good time to remember how good he was in all of this. All right, well, that's going to do it for Bombs Away. Again, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Be sure to follow us on those pages. Also, give us a 5-star review on the podcast platforms. Always helps out as well. Now that I've gone through my generic pitch, Happy New Year, guys. We'll see you in 2024, where I'm pinning that the Twins are going to make a move in the next 31 days. I'm probably going to be wrong. So rip to me when I got to eat my words on that.